Please be seated. The comedian Woody Allen once said something that sums up how uncomfortable Americans are about the thought of their own death. "I'm not afraid to die," he said. "I just don't want to be there when it happens. Everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die." Yep. Still, it's true. We won't truly get to Easter if we haven't first passed through Good Friday. So don't skip the Good Friday service this year. We follow a Lord who was most alive when facing his own death. If we too really want to live, then we must become acquainted with our companion, Brother Death. That is what this story of Lazarus is all about. Lazarus was at home in Bethany, deathly ill and being cared for by his sisters, Mary and Martha. You remember Mary, the impractical one who wasted all that expensive perfume pouring it over Jesus when he last visited the sisters. Martha, I'm sure you remember, is the practical one who was so good in the kitchen that she made her own matzah from scratch. The sisters sent a message to Jesus. "Lord, he whom you love is ill." What did Jesus do? Instead of rushing off in the middle of the night like a good rabbi is expected to do, he brushed off the message saying, "This illness doesn't lead to death." We might wonder how Jesus knew that without having seen Lazarus. But then Jesus said that Lazarus' illness is for the glory of God. This is the second time we've heard that phrase recently. Last week we heard Jesus say that a man had been born blind for the glory of God. This week we hear that a man dies for the glory of God. How we live matters, but so does how we die. If we live for the glory of God, if we live as if our lives are a miracle of God, then we will die that way as well. If our lives are haunted by the fear of death, it will diminish our lives. Søren Kierkegaard claimed that we limit and diminish ourselves in order to avoid the confrontation with death, which he called the terror, perdition, and annihilation that dwells next door to each of us. Jesus, however, was not restricted by the fear of death. Neither the threat to Lazarus' life nor the threat to his own life on the cross controlled how Jesus lived. The disciples warned Jesus, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" Well, Jesus waited a few days, and then he left for Bethany. Jesus finally arrived in Bethany, but it was all over. Lazarus was wrapped in his shroud and entombed for 4 days. He was very dead. Martha comes to meet Jesus, and he hears her disappointment. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Nothing he can say will console her. She wants her brother back, and she believes Jesus can still do that for her. After all, what else do they have? Two unmarried women alone in a patriarchal world. What's going to become of them? Without Lazarus, they're so vulnerable that they too are as good as dead. Jesus accepts her pain but offers only the truth in return. "I am the resurrection and the life," he says. When words fail to comfort, then simple truth must suffice. We may hear the good news of the resurrection and still feel the pain of loss. This week, our Lenten journey brings us face to face with our human limitations. It helps us to understand and accept our weaknesses. Still, we experience this feeling every time we sit with someone who will never get better. We feel it every time we face a new personal limitation of our own. It's a feeling of frustration and helplessness at the power of death. If we are truthful about our lives, then like Jesus, we will be greatly troubled in the spirit of the specter of death. The climactic scene occurs when Jesus asks, "Where have you laid him?" Like loyal soldiers, they reply, "Lord, come and see." There it is. There's that phrase, "Come and see." These are words of enlistment in the service of God's kingdom. Come and see, the Father needs you. In the beginning of John's Gospel, two of John's disciples asked Jesus, "Where are you staying, Lord?" And Jesus replied, "Come and see." They came, they saw, and they became Jesus' first disciples. 2 weeks ago, Jesus revealed himself for the first time to a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. She dropped her water jar and ran to call the people of the city to faith. She called out, "Come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done." Come and see. When Jesus heard those words, Jesus wept. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, whom we're studying on Wednesday night, Lutheran pastor who died for his faith in a Nazi death concentration camp. He said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. Well, when Jesus called Lazarus come out, he knew that Lazarus would die again. Jesus called Lazarus from his place of rest in God's heavenly kingdom to rejoin the battle to build God's kingdom here on earth. Lazarus would have to suffer some more. In fact, in the very next chapter, temple conspirators decide that Lazarus must die as well as Jesus. The gospel says that Jesus wept. But why did he weep? Certainly Jesus wept for Lazarus and those who grieved for him. Perhaps he wept as well for his own suffering that he was going to soon experience on the cross, and which now pressed hard upon him. But Jesus also wept for the cost of discipleship that was now so plainly set before him. Here he sees the full cost of what he was asking from his disciples. He wept tears of compassion for all those who would follow in the way of the cross. The victory of the cross does not mean the end to suffering. Quite the contrary. Those who will not bow down to the deadly dominion of the powers and principalities that govern this age may greatly suffer for it, as we've seen recently. Jesus weeps for us as well. Our Lenten journey connects us with all those who follow in the way of the cross. And the letter of the Hebrews tells us of the heroes of our faith. The letter says they conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and put foreign armies to flight. If that were it, we'd be in pretty good shape. But they also are stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, yet of whom the world was not worthy. This is both our heritage and our destiny. We may not die a martyr's death, but we shall surely die. Ernest Becker once wrote that the irony of our condition is that our deepest need is to be free from the anxiety of death and annihilation. But it is life itself which awakens our desire. If we give in to our fear of death, it will cost us. It will cost us the ability to live as fully alive human beings. The Christian is a witness to the power of the resurrection. The Christian writer Charles Williams was so full of life and vitality that when he died, his friend C.S. Lewis wrote, "No event has so confirmed my faith in the next world as Williams did simply by dying." When the idea of death and the idea of Williams thus met in my mind, it was the idea of death that was changed. The journey of Christian discipleship undertakes the enormous task of freeing us from the fear of death, making us so free that love can completely govern our lives. Earlier, Jesus said, "I came that they might have life and have it abundantly." Living abundantly means that even when we grieve for all the suffering and death in the world, we cling to the truth that in Christ we have victory over death so certain that even in the shadow of death we shall not fear. Jesus still says today, "I am the resurrection and I am the life." A Christian can trust this as fact. If the Lord of life makes you free, you will be free indeed.